Welcome to Notre Dame Spring. Welcome to our third plenary session of our conference, Revolutions of Hope, Resilience and Recovery in Ukraine. My name is Clemens Sedmak and I serve as director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. I always have to write this down not to forget that. A little announcement, please don't forget to switch your cell phones back on after the event. We don't want you to miss an important call. I hope that this day has already brought you many reasons to be hopeful. What's the power of hope? In his text, which we should quote at least once during this conference, on the portico of the mystery of hope, French author Serhii Plokhy portrays God commenting on the virtues of faith, hope, and love, which are presented as three sisters on a journey. Walking between two adult sisters, faith and love, hope is a little girl who, unlike her elders, goes unnoticed. But hope is strong. And Plokhy writes that God is surprised by hope. Hope needs to be grounded in order not to be an illusion, for example, grounded in history. The power of hope, the Russo-Ukrainian war through the eyes of a historian, is the theme of this session. We want to welcome Professor Serhii Plokhy, Professor of Ukrainian History and Director of the Ukrainian Research Institute at Harvard University. Serhii is a worldwide leading expert on Eastern European history with a particular emphasis on Ukraine's historical and geopolitical context. Among his many influential publications is the 2023 book, The Russo-Ukrainian War, The Return of History. There are many demands on Professor Plokhy's time for good and sad reasons, so it is a privilege to welcome you here. Welcome, Professor Plokhy. Professor Plokhy's conversation partner and host will be the already introduced Rector Taras Dobko. Professor Dobko, a trained mathematician and philosopher, a man of deep integrity, has served as rector of the Ukrainian Catholic University since 2023, after 15 years in the role of vice rector. I have no idea how you do that. I am proud to say that Taras is affiliate faculty of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. You know, I just leave my script for a moment. I once asked a colleague who plays in this league, what is it like to be tall and good looking? And he said, it's a curse. Anyway, welcome, Taras. It's great to have you here. Welcome, Taras. This is the choreography. Professor Plokhy will give a lecture, and after that, Rector Dobko will engage Serhii in a conversation. If there is time, and if you have questions, and if Taras is in the mood, there will be Q&A. We will end at 6:12. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you for organizing this event. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, to see a lot of good old friends and see so many unfamiliar faces in the audience. This is quite a treat. That's more than just hope. There is already some realization of the hope that the Ukrainian field is growing, that Ukrainian field is alive. The hope is one of the most important theme of this conference. Resilience is another. And when I was preparing for my remarks, I was thinking that if you have a hope and you add resilience, you can get a miracle. And miracle will be part of also one of the themes that I am going to talk about. Let us go back in recent memory, 3 years before today, 3 years and a number of days, the start of the all-out Russian aggression against Ukraine. And the aggression started against all hopes, in particular in Ukraine, also in the West. There was evidence out there that the Russian troops were massing on the Ukrainian borders, but there was deep-seated hope that probably this would not happen. And that hope certainly was betrayed. But then a different sort of hope also emerges, that Ukraine will stand. And at that point, it was little more than a hope, because at that time, situation is very different now, very different today. But at that time, 3 years ago, Washington and Moscow were actually not on the same page. They were very different attitudes toward what was happening in Ukraine, what was happening in Russia. But there was one basically silent agreement. And it included not just Washington and Moscow, but also Brussels and other capitals. Ukraine would not last. Ukraine was doomed. It would not go beyond, if not 3 days, then at least 2 weeks. Where we are today, it's already 4th year of the war. Ukraine stands tall. Others are falling. Ukraine stands and Ukraine keeps fighting, which is, from the perspective of where we were 3 years ago, is nothing short of a miracle. If you think about a country that has no navy, defeating navy of a major country, Cold War superpower, and forcing the Russian Navy into the western part of the Black Sea, chasing them away from the Crimea. Is there any other explanation? Probably we can add other words to that as well, but certainly hope, resilience, and miracle come to mind. We don't get good news now from the front line in Kursk, but imagine 3 years ago that the Ukrainian armed forces would go into the territory of the Russian Federation and would actually be able to stay there for now months, for more than half of a year. Of course, probably no one would imagine, not only in Washington, not in Moscow, Brussels, but also in Kyiv. We are now not in the place where we certainly wanted to be 3 years ago, where we wanted to be or expected to be even 1 month or maybe 2 weeks before today. We're in a much more uncertain and much more dangerous place. But that is where hope and resilience really come to the fore. What I'm going to talk about today will be just one episode in the history of the Russo-Ukrainian War. And that episode is about another quite on the one hand, unexpected development, something that happened against the hope that it would not happen, but it's also an episode that gives, at least it gave me a lot of hope when I researched it. That is the story of the Ukrainian resilience of roughly 300 men and women of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant who went through the Russian occupation of the nuclear power plant, of Chernobyl town itself, of the exclusion zone, in the first months and 1 week of the all-out war. This is the subject of my book that was released last year, in the fall of last year, and it will appear in Ukrainian translation. The publication date is March the 10th. And I certainly, with a lot of anxiety, waiting for that moment, but also for the situation in which some of the key characters of that story will be able to read this book, and then whether they will recognize themselves or not. We will see how it will happen, but that's where my sort of anxiety comes from. So what happened in Chernobyl? There is a lot of talk about this war in the past and also today, and a lot of concern about the war going nuclear. Well, the reality is that the war went nuclear already on the very first day of the all-out Russian aggression. For the first time in history, the Russian army occupied a nuclear site. A week later, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, was occupied as well. And more than that, there was a battle taking place on the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. This is an image of the sort of the equipment that was used to prepared to storm the headquarters of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant company and on the site of Chernobyl plant and intimidate the Ukrainians that were working there. Very often we think about Chernobyl in terms of exclusion zone, and it is a 30-kilometer exclusion zone, which for some short period of time in 1986, when the accident happened, indeed was just a 30-kilometer exclusion zone when they didn't know where the wind was blowing, what the radiation levels were, and so on and so forth. But the real Chernobyl zone is like that. And as you can see, there are in the background, there are the levels of the radiation poisoning. As you can see that even this new Chernobyl zone, the small circle is 10 kilometer, larger is 30 kilometer, and then what you see here is the Ukrainian part of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. To the north, there is a Belarusian one. So these are highly contaminated areas, and the new borders really don't fully correspond yet to the contamination zones. But this is not a good place to work. This is a dangerous place to do anything there, and of course it's not a great place to conduct war. But what happened was that the Russian army that attacked from the territory of Belarus, the shortest way to get to Kyiv was through Chernobyl. This is the direction of the attack, and within the very first hours of the war, really the Chernobyl nuclear power plant already ended in the rear of the advancing Russian army. The Russian tank and the soldiers from the Russian National Guard, these are their commanders, General Burakov and Colonel Frolinkov, who were later given the award of the Hero of Russia for allegedly saving the world from another Chernobyl disaster, when in reality they brought that disaster to Chernobyl. And this is a battle. I'm not trying politically correct here with Fox News. It's just the image that I got. But this is the live reportage on the attempt by the Russian army to take over Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. One of the Ukrainian engineers put the feed from the cameras of internal surveillance to the YouTube channel, and the entire world was able actually to see what was happening there. So close to 300 Ukrainian members of the National Guard, the engineers and operators, the support staff at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant found themselves in captivity. And that is basically where my story is focused on, and where also the hope, where the resilience, and also where the miracle resides, at least in the way how I look at that story. This man, his name is Valentin Heiko. He was 59 when he was a foreman of the crew. They came to work for 12 hours, roughly 80 people. He turned 60 at the time of the occupation of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And if you look at him, if you listen to him, I never met him in person, but I watched hours and hours of interviews with him and appearance. He's a very quiet and unassuming man, a sort of a computer geek. But oh my gosh, what a strong character that person has, and how he led people around him in this absolutely situation of uncharted waters, and how he was able to really defend his dignity, the dignity of his staff, and also show resilience and resist in so many ways. He was the leader, but others were there as well. So these people are in the rear of the Russian army. As far as they know, the Russians moved on Kyiv probably, and Russians are telling him that Kyiv will fall within the next few days, next few hours. They are kidnapped, but they were able to turn the tables on the occupiers. They were able to kidnap kidnappers in a very particular way. It started from the very first encounter with the Russian commanders, when Valentin Heiko said, okay, I am so-and-so, and I represent here Ukraine. Who are you? They gave their names, and then he said, what are you doing here? The answer was, well, we are here to protect the dangerous nuclear site from the Ukrainian nationalists and Banderites. Heiko tells them, do you have a definition what Banderite is? Do you know what you're looking for? They looked at each other, and he said, well, if you don't have a definition, you can start arrests with me. So that's how the conversation starts. After 2-3 hours, the Russian military commanders leave the office, where they agreed on the way how, what actually, they were accepted the limitations of their power on that nuclear power plant. He told them that you think that you took over a regular nuclear power plant. You're absolutely wrong. Indeed, the group that, commanders that was there engaged in the capture of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, they trained on the Kursk nuclear power plant that Ukrainian armed forces moved relatively close last summer to. But they had no clue what Chernobyl was. The Russian scientists that then came later and engineers also didn't know what to do with that, because that was a unique, and it is a unique in the world nuclear site, with absolutely unique new confinement over the 4th reactor that was not so far ago hit by a Russian drone, with the not so unique but very dangerous cooling ponds, where the fuel from the functioning reactors, the last reactor was closed in the year 2000, but the fuel is actually too hot. It is kept in the cooling ponds, which need pumps need electricity, and so on and so forth. So Heiko told them that, okay, either you are behaving according to our rules and the rules of the state of Ukraine and International Atomic Energy Agency, or you are all leaving this place in the coffins. The special zones were where the Russian military were agreed that they would be able to get to those zones only on the basis of the permissions issued by Heiko and his people. So they used their knowledge of nuclear energy and nuclear power and that site They used this knowledge really to empower themselves. They were still under occupation, and there were a lot of limitations, and there was a lot of abuse and a lot of pressure. But they acquired that power that they used through the whole period of the occupation to really defend their dignity and also to protect themselves, but also their families in the town, in the city of Slavutich, where their families lived. The ways of resistance were very varied. One, and it seems to me the images. Yeah, this is Lyudmila Kozak, one of the engineers, the nuclear power plant, Chernobyl nuclear power plant. There was, the majority were men, but there were roughly maybe 10 to 15 female personnel. Engineers, one it seems to me was the soldier in the Ukrainian National Guard. And they faced the situation of a sort that you encounter in reading about the Red Army in Berlin. So the station is occupied. The Russian soldiers are there. They engage in looting. They engaged also in drinking. The Ukrainian sources say that 1/3 of the garbage that was produced were empty bottles. So women find themselves especially in a very difficult situation. Again, Heiko is there, other members of Ukrainian personnel to help them, but also they try to establish good relations with the commanders, with the generals. And Lyudmila Kozak was stopped more than once, and they demanded that she would be wearing the white armband, which basically Ukrainians resisted in all this area. It reminded certainly many of them about either family memories or the films about World War II, about Holocaust. She resisted. She didn't want to wear white armband. And eventually, one of the Russian soldiers stopped her and said, okay, we know who you are, but during the nighttime, if we see you and there is no armband, we don't know who is approaching, you can be killed. So she goes to the general and says, would I be allowed, instead of armband, to wear a white hat that the personnel was here? So that was her first small victory. The next one came with she had a scarf, multicolor scarf, and she got out of there blue and yellow threads and embroidered the Ukrainian trident on her cap, and went through the entire occupation period wearing that hat. At the moment when the news came that Putin gave a speech in which he made a veiled threat of the use of nuclear weapons, it was early March of 2022. Heiko called in the Russian commanders and told them, well, if this is happening, we have nothing to lose. I worked here since 1987. I will find the way that you will never actually leave this place alive. And here are my demands: do this, this, and that. Most of my sources come from the Ukrainian side. But that particular episode is confirmed by the Russian commanders who were on the Russian TV, describing how difficult and how dangerous the mission was, and that the Ukrainian head of the chief of the shift threatened them with the nuclear disaster. Those commanders were basically well-educated and intelligent people, but they believed that the reactors were still operating. And that was the power of the Ukrainian personnel on the nuclear power plant. They were playing all sorts of tricks on their captors. One of them was when the two operators are passing a Russian soldier and one asks another in Russian. I'll talk about that. They're 80% Russian speakers. And the question was, do you still have those pills that we were prescribed to deal with the radiation? And the other guy says, no, I ran out of that. And then the answer goes, then we are screwed. And they pass by, and the soldier is there thinking he never got any pills. These were people who came from, I'm talking about the Ukrainian personnel of the station. They lived in the city of Slavutych that was, and is approximately 60 kilometers away. There is a long story of the change of shifts that I described there. But the point is that the city of Slavutych is the youngest city in Ukraine. And this is the last Soviet city. The regions of Slavutych are named after the republics, Georgian, Armenian, after Moscow and Leningrad, or at least used to be called. So where the construction workers came and helped to build the city. The population was also the late Soviet, it's basically imperial city with people coming from all sorts of parts of the Soviet Union. And the city that until 2020 voted for the Party of Regions. But in the battle between much stronger Russia and much weaker Ukraine, they had chosen to stay with Ukraine. And there was, looking at what I know from the Ukrainian sources, checking on the Russians, there were actually no people who were switching sides. And they found themselves in really, really impossible situation. The first time in history the war is coming to the nuclear power plant. There are no protocols. No plant ever in Zaporizhzhia or in Chernobyl was built with the idea that actually it could withstand the battle happening on the nuclear power plant. What is in these conditions loyalty and what is betrayal? Is it loyalty means that I take up arms and fight back at the tank and tank shoots at me and we are getting a nuclear disaster? Or the loyalty is actually to work with the occupiers to preclude that disaster? In Chernobyl, the National Guard lays down weapons. In Zaporizhzhia, they're fighting back. This is gray area. There are no laws on the international level. There are no regulations. These people on the spot decide who they are, what is their position, and how they're supposed to deal with that. And what comes out of that, the level of solidarity, the level of resistance, and the level of hope that this occupation will come to an end is really astonishing. They decided for themselves what loyalty was. For Valentin Heiko, he was saying that loyalty is actually to stay here and to follow the protocols of the International Atomic Energy Agency, in a sense that we are not allowed to leave the station because it would explode. One man left the station and went to his family, walking through the war zone, approximately 60 kilometers, a very dangerous trip. Heiko considered him to be a traitor. According to the Ukrainian law, probably he was the only one who didn't betray Ukraine because he refused to work at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They didn't know what to expect when the Ukrainian army shows up. They refused to surrender, that they resist in any way possible, but they don't know what will happen when the Ukrainian army will show up. When there is an exchange of shifts and they have to go, this is the station and then the city of Slavutych. They had to cross the Dnipro to get to Slavutich. This are sketches from the Washington Post. They published one of the chapters of the book. So it was very difficult to find a boat, and fishermen who were approached, they said, we are not going to do that because actually they're collaborators. We don't want to help collaborators to go on one side of the river or another. As I mentioned, they were people of different ethnic backgrounds. Some of them spoke Ukrainian, mostly spoke Russian. Some of them with very strong Volga accent, not Ukrainian Russian, but really Russian accent. And they resisted not only at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, but they also resisted at the city of Slavutich, where their families were. Eventually, they were exchanged, and the moment they arrived in Slavutich, the Russian attack started on the Slavutich. So they created a self-defense unit. They were holding the city for 2 or 3 days. And their new shift at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant sent a message to Moscow that unless you stop attacking our city and our families, our deal is off. We actually end in all of that. You will get an explosion here. And the Russians backed off. And there is a story of the transformation, really, of the society. I'm talking about the very Soviet society that now raises in defense of Ukraine. There is a story of one Orthodox priest, Ivan Shpinda, in Slavutich. He comes from Western Ukraine. He was considered to be a nationalist before 2014. He serves in the Moscow Patriarchate, in the Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate. After 2014, the atmosphere in the city changes. Many look at him actually as a traitor and as a Moscophile. And when the Russians approached and moved to the center of the city, Father Shpinda was conducting a liturgy, and he saw what is happening. He said, I was dressed, I was ready to die. He rushes there, runs against these Russian soldiers, and one of the Russian soldiers is a former seminarian, and they engage in a sort of semi-theological debate on what is happening, and what the Russian seminarian says that actually you are punished for your sins, and the priest says you are, it seems to me, you are a punishment, or you're a sin, or something like that. So there is this story, and at that time the Russians started to back off, partially probably because of the orders coming from the top, and given what was happening at Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the threats that were there. There is another very interesting moment in that story that is related directly to religion. Yeah, that's an image of in the city of Enerhodar near Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant under the Russian occupation. The workers of another city like Slavutich, very mixed background, marching. This is the deputy mayor of the city who was eventually kidnapped by the Russians.
It says Russians go home.
Yeah, Russians go home. So, as I mentioned to you, the attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was on YouTube channel and was transmitted in real time. There is a organization in Ukraine which is basically regulates nuclear industry in the country. country that has nuclear industry has such an organization. And it has a website. And normal people don't go on that website. What I mean normal are people who don't belong to the industry, right? There are engineers and scientists, and it's difficult to understand sometimes if you're from outside of the industry what they're talking about, what sort of advice they give to each other. There is that moment when they're watching what is happening at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The scientific discourse in which they were involved ends. They're not given anymore any advice. For roughly 20 or 30 minutes, the discourse is religious. There's highly educated, probably believers or non-believers, but certainly normally people who don't talk in those terms, they're saying, Mother of God, protect us, protect Ukraine. It is going probably for, again, as I said, 20 or 25 minutes before they realize that crisis is not there. Eventually they switch to their lingua that they normally use, secular and scientific and so on and so forth. Chernobyl acquired in the Ukrainian history, in Ukrainian memory, a place of really enormous significance, not only political and cultural, but also religious. It was one of the also major factors that really turned toward religion people in that area. It was certainly the story that made prominent Ukrainian poets like Ivan Drach to write poems with strong religious motives. And it was interesting for me to see how religion, to a degree, came back and returned. Now, not just only to Chernobyl, but to Zaporizhzhia. And how people were turning to religious themes, and religious leaders were becoming the leaders in the community in this absolutely terrifying circumstances. The story of Chernobyl, unlike the story of Zaporizhzhia, has a happy ending, at least the happy ending today. The Ukrainian armed forces show up. They're welcomed. A few weeks later, anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, April 26, President Zelensky rewards Heiko and other people with the decorations of Ukraine. They're recognized not as collaborators or traitors, they're recognized as heroes. The story of Zaporizhzhia actually continues till today. 2 days ago, the news were about the Russians putting on trial one of the workers of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, allegedly for working together with the Ukrainian intelligence or Ukrainian government. But the story of Chernobyl gives example, gives hope, provides also a testimony to the formation in Ukraine of a new society in which it doesn't matter what your roots are and origins were, and what language do you speak, and what church are you going to. These people from the most Soviet cities in Ukraine decided contra spem spero, hope against hope, to fight back, and they succeeded. They emerged as victors in this, first of all, moral struggle with occupiers, but also Ukraine came and liberated them. Before this talk, I Googled what hope was about. What is hope? And there are many, many definitions of that, and some of them sounded, were discussed, and you could hear them today. The one that artificial intelligence produced first for me was saying that this is ability to assess capacity to achieve goals and then stay motivated. People in Chernobyl certainly were able to achieve that. I want to end my remarks with appeal to all of us, never to underestimate our capacity and ability to achieve goals that we have in front of us. And never lose hope, stay motivated, and miracles do happen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Plokhy, for your presentation, and especially for sharing the stories of real, concrete people who were indifferent and on whom so much depended at that particular moment in our history. I have got, 3 questions related to your presentation, and I would like to jump directly to those questions. First of all, these stories also reminded me about other stories that were told and described and fortunately gathered, and there are many of them around the country. And actually one of the projects at the Ukrainian Catholic University is called Small Stories of the Big War, really to highlight those real people who in their particular way responded to the crisis, to the disaster, to the war, and behaved in a human way. And I also remember an article by Anne Applebaum and Natalia Humenyuk from, I think it was in late fall 2022, when they interviewed different people in Kherson region who escaped from occupied territories and who either served in local self-governance or were volunteer, and all of them were questioned by occupiers who couldn't believe that people are doing something for the sake of the common good and not being motivated just by some financial gain or by fear from the authorities, and they suspected them of being part of some secret organization. Therefore, they were arrested and questioned. And my first question is, what you think, what you kind of see as a main change, what stands out for you in a special way during the last 3 years in Ukraine? Can we talk about new quality of Ukrainian society? So you started mentioning about the civic engagement and other things. Could you develop a little bit, elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, you mentioned the name of Natalia Humenyuk. This is a prominent journalist in Ukraine. She also runs the project which is called Reckoning Project, collecting evidence. So good part of what I have in my book, what I discussed today, comes from the Reckoning Project. Mm-hmm. They were partially funded by USAID. So I want to thank the US taxpayers and that particular organization for doing that important work and supporting such organizations in the past. I hope, yes, contra spem spero, that will happen again. I'm a historian, right? So what I was doing in that book is something that I was not supposed to do. We are working with the archives. We're working with historiography and make our argument against something that was written before us. And here I was working with really very, very recent very recent developments. So, for me, it was really very important to look at what happened in Chernobyl, and that was my really empirical understanding of the Ukrainian society. And there were highly motivated, highly educated people like Heiko and others. But there was also in the town of Chernobyl, there were women who are known through one of the films that was also available here and still is available in the United States, which is called Babushkas of Chernobyl. And those were illegal settlers in the area, most of them female, of over 50, over 60, who were engaged in the sort of partisan warfare with the Ukrainian state. Because Ukrainian state police in particular was trying to actually push them out from, they're not supposed to live there, it's dangerous, and they were finding the way to live there. And when they were occupied, there were no actually stronger Ukrainian patriots than those babushkas of Chernobyl. The interviews with them are very, very interesting in terms of their communication with the Russian soldiers. And looking at what is happening on the Russian side, disregard for life, not only of Ukrainians, but of your own soldiers. Sending your troops through the most dangerous place in the world, the exclusion zone. On the heavy equipment, rising radioactive dust. I was showing there digging the trenches on the verge of the Red Forest. There was a lot Soviet. There was a lot for me about 1986 and how the Soviet Union actually functioned and how it treated people. And my conclusion was actually that Russia didn't change. Actually, it got worse in that particular case because what you didn't see at Chernobyl was looting that was absolutely central part of the Russian operation during the first weeks and first months of the war. So the Soviet line of disregard for human life, it continued. The Soviet line, when actually the commander tells you something and you're doing that, it continued. One of the reasons why Heiko was actually so, I don't know, brave or so open in opposing to the Russian military commanders, because he saw them back in 87 and 88. And he had contempt for them, for the Soviets, and then for the Russian officers. He was telling one of the Russian officers, I don't know how you're going to sleep at night. You brought these young kids, his Russian soldiers there, and they're living in this radioactive dirt and this and that. How you're doing that? So that's this Soviet plus new Russian realities. That's one line. Another line that I found out, and I was looking at that and I was thinking, okay, it can't be also black and white on one side and another. Am I just engaged in the warfare myself and miss gray? But at the end of the day, what you see on the Ukrainian side is actually the self-organization. There is a level of dignity that no commander is able to really tell you how to behave or how not to behave. And on the other hand, at least in that industry, in this place, there was this really almost religious adherence to the regulations and to the norms of the safety culture and procedure and so on and so forth. So I understand that actually world is not black and white. This war is black and white, but people's behavior can be different. But I was going back to the sources, I was checking them. It's two very different societies, which also explain why the miracle of 2022 in Ukraine, why Ukraine resisted and why Ukraine prevailed.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I would like to come back, to the beginning of your speech, and there was an interesting line. I would like you to elaborate a little more about it. So you mentioned Ukraine stands, others are falling. So it seems that maybe, I don't know what you meant, but I assume that probably you meant that democracy is in many places on retreat, and we also are witnessing the influence of far-right parties growing in Europe and in the US. And my question is, honestly speaking, also we have some people in Ukraine who believe that, in such a world of rising national egoism, it is silly and even maybe self-defeating to adhere to the democratic vision of the Ukrainian national project. And I wonder how war influences, the situation. And did the war make this far-right project more appealing to the Ukrainian population? And how does Ukraine handle its character as a political nation during the war?
Yeah. Thank you. I had in mind something different. I published an interview in Le Monde, it seems to me, yes, where I said that Ukraine is standing, America is falling, and this is the chance for Europe to assert its agency. So fallen, I was talking about Ukraine's biggest ally, who is certainly fallen as an ally. So that's what I meant. But in terms of the democracy and democratic project, democracy is a huge part of this war. In the last few months, it became maybe not very the discussion about war and democracy doesn't get the sort of the traction that it was getting back in 2022. But it doesn't mean that democracy is somehow diminished in its significance and its importance. Democracy in Ukraine was and will continue to be a much larger threat to Putin's Russia than NATO ever was or ever will be. Because it gives an example to someone who says Russians and Ukrainians are one and the same people. And if others believe in that Ukrainians are democratic, what is wrong with the Russians? This is the first question. This is a threat to the regime that, as I said, no NATO will ever present. Another important part of, so crushing not just Ukraine, crushing Ukrainian democratic project is essential for the survival of the authoritarian regime in Russia. As simple as that. Ukraine staying democratic has the right to apply and be a member of the European Union. The union that is open only for democratic countries. So that's another important geopolitical category there. And then the third point that I want to make. It's sometimes maybe easy to imagine that, okay, Ukrainians talk about democracy to somehow get on the hook either Europeans or the Americans or the Canadians. Please help us for the sake of democracy. The reality is that for Ukrainians to understand themselves, to explain what is happening in terms of democracy, in terms of freedom, related value, and related category, is the most natural way to think about themselves. we had here discussion about multiplicity of religious backgrounds of Ukrainians and Ukrainian leaders. The president is an ethnic Jew. The Minister of Defense is a Muslim, is a Crimean Tatar. The commander of the Ukrainian army, Serhii, is a Russian from Russia. You get news, you have videos from the Ukrainian front line, you hear at least two languages, Russian and Ukrainian. So if you're not fighting for religion, or particular sort of the church, which is right and every other church is wrong. If you're not fighting for a particular language, or you have this fight in more than one language, what are you fighting for? You are fighting for your way of life, which is about democracy and which is about freedom and is very deeply rooted in Ukraine, no matter what region it is, what religion it is, what language are people speaking. So this is about Ukrainian self-identification rather than an attempt to sell themselves in a particular way to potential allies. So that's at the core. And then geopolitical issues about which I was talking before, the threat to Russia, the ability to join European Union, that creates a frame, but at the center of that is Ukrainian experience and Ukrainian self-identification.
In your presentation, you mentioned what I would call local story of deterrence. When Valentin Heiko was threatening Russian soldiers that if they don't stop, he will kind of blow up the station. And it reminded me one of your conversation I think you had with Volodymyr Yermolenko, who is a philosopher, and there was a discussion about Cold War, and that this deterrence model during Cold War was based not only on the model of military balance, but also on the so-called balance of fear. What we see now that somehow it seems that Russia has a monopoly of scaring, of kind of blackmailing, yes, others, and in this sense using somehow this balance of fear is destroyed. And my question is, now we have this story of deterrence here, local story, how to make Russia scared?
Yeah, I think that there was enormous disbalance in fear. Again, Churchill was talking about balance of terror, and I kind of piggybacked on him and added fear, so balance of fear. And it was, Putin was threatening with the use of nuclear weapons. And Chernobyl was under occupation. The war was happening on Zaporizhzhia. But the headlines in the media were about what Putin said or what didn't say when the war already went nuclear in one very particular way, because the way how radiation acts on the human being, on the environment, there are some differences, but they're not significant between the bomb and the nuclear power plant. And the fear of Putin using nuclear weapons was, for President Biden administration, my conviction is, the key reason of delays with the supply in Ukraine, with the equipment that was needed, with the armaments that were needed, and so on and so forth. And the big concern was about the red lines. Crimea was the red line. So the supplies were not going after the successes of Ukrainian army in October 2022 because Putin started to blackmail again, and the US intelligence was saying that chances are 50-50 that he would use nuclear weapons because the Russian front collapsed. So, and if Crimea, there would be, of course, nuclear war. Ukrainian army today is fighting on the territory of the Russian Federation. Ukrainians went there without informing Washington. And frankly, in the last almost a year, I didn't hear actually much concern about Russians using nuclear weapons. And the key reason for that, there are many reasons. US diplomacy was working very well and also engaging China. And there were pressure from China and India who are not interested in things going nuclear. So there were many elements. But the key element of actually where I think there is a much more balance of fear, the key factor that brought that in relative balance was the Ukrainian bravery and Ukrainian resistance. They were calling the bluff. They were calling the Russian bluff. So we certainly hear about nuclear weapons and the Third World War again and again now and today. But comparing to my understanding of what was in 2022 and 23 and how really concerned were people in Washington about that possibility, this is more like a particular use of particular tropes rather than expressing the real concern.
Thank you. Now I think we can take a few questions from the audience. Professor Kazanova first, and then here. Professor Kazanova.
Well, thank you, Serhii, for this fantastic story and for this new book. I mean, you are writing fantastic new books much faster than we can read them. So thank you. Thank you for that too.
Never give up on the hope.
And I want to basically also make just a comment on the argument that the real threat to Russia is Ukrainian democracy. And I was very suspicious of Zelensky when the day he was elected. But as a sociologist, I had to take it seriously. 73% of the people saw something in him. But then I heard his inaugural speech. And after everything he said, he went, "You Belarusians, you Russians, we did it. You can do it too." That moment, I know that he was not a Putin, basically man, as everybody was afraid he was, or a Kolomoisky man. And that day, Putin knew that he could not make deals with Zelensky, that he was a serious democratic leader who could not so easily be basically, corrupted, if you wish. And so in this respect, I think it's very, very important. Because, I was suspicious because basically he made fun of everything that for a lot of Ukrainians was sacred, right? Not only the church, the Tomos, all the histories, the Cossacks, everything that now, of course, views as sacred. But this democratic core was there and has been really, really his redeeming thing, I would say.
Yes, I actually was terrified when Zelensky was elected. Really what you see just going beyond Zelensky is that it's a new generation of Ukrainians who came to the fore and very much who really carry the burden of this war. Not just younger, the army, we are saying disproportionately, there are people in their 50s and 60s. But if you look at people in the positions of power in the army, in the government, in the state, in the ministries, in producing drones, this is basically in terms of the political group and managerial group, these are all people in their 30s roughly. Zelensky is the oldest out of all of them. And that's about also generational change. And I wonder to what degree different generations have also different hope or different expectations. With Anna Bezikova, we discussed her presentation at Harvard, and one of the themes there was probably not enough time also to talk about the differences, generational differences between the activists of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church around late 1980s and their different expectations. So the expectations and hope of this generation are different. And they're certainly not the only one who are fighting back. There are babushkas of Chernobyl as well, right there in the trenches. But it's a new generation that came to the fore, and generation that is different from the people who came from the Russian and Belarusian side to liberate them, quote unquote, of course.
There is a hand from Matt, right?
Thank you, Serhii. So I'd like to return to this question of the historian's gaze. So what particular advantage does a historian have in telling this story? What makes a Soviet city in 2022 not such a Soviet city after all? And I'm thinking in particular, not to lead your answer too much, but about the relationship between Ukrainian society and the management of the environment, the appreciation of nuclear power. I used to teach a long time ago. It's quite a good book by Adriana Petrina, anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania, called Biological Citizenship, in which she argued Ukrainian legitimacy as a new state was very much premised on its ability to handle the aftermath of Chernobyl. So I wonder what you think of that idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Chernobyl was at the foundation of Ukrainian mobilization and the birth of Ukrainian politics, especially in Kyiv and Eastern Ukraine, almost to the same degree as the movement for legalization of the Greek Catholic Church was in Western Ukraine. So two things were putting people on the streets in the late 80s. And the government was actually believed that probably they're not in a position to clash those and go after those manifestations. The Greek Catholic Church and the first mass rally, really mass rally in Lviv, it seems to me it is about Greek Catholic Church. The first mass rally in Kyiv, it's 10,000 people. The rally in downtown Kyiv, it's about Chernobyl and ecology. So it's two movements out of which really the Ukrainian state was born. And Ukraine is one of the places that suffered the most. But proportionally speaking, it's not the main victim of Chernobyl. Proportionally speaking, Belarus is the main victim of Chernobyl in terms of the territory covered and so on and so forth. But in Belarus, you never saw that sort of mobilization. So in that sense, the idea that environment not just matters, but you actually have to go out there and to defend it, almost became a cultural DNA of this new Ukrainian state and new Ukrainian nation. To a degree, as a pluralism of religion became certainly also one of this key moments in the birth of the new nation. I'm speaking here as a historian, avoiding talking about 2022 and 2025 and finding refuge in safer place like 86, 87, and 89. But I think that's what certainly a factor there. And another thing that I found interesting about Chernobyl itself, there is a particular code of ethics associated with the heroes of Chernobyl of 1986. It's about self-sacrifice. At the entrance to the headquarters, there is a monument to the first person who died from the Chernobyl explosion, not as an explosion, but from radiation poisoning. His name was, first name now escapes me, last name was Shevchenko. This is the guy who was there during the first night, got a lot of radiation. They put him in the hospital. But his shift, his crew was there. So he escaped from the hospital. He joined his guys, got additional radiation level. He was the first to die from. And there is a monument to him. And I write in my book that when the Russian officers were marching into the building and passing this monument, they didn't know whom that monument was to, and they didn't know what was waiting for them behind those doors. So that example, that spirit of how important is to protect the world from the nuclear, from the radiation, from the nuclear energy. It's almost part of who those people are, how they imagined who they were. Thank you.
Otherwise, very merciful man, Clemens, is not such a man when it comes to timing. So thank you so much, and I would like you to join with applause to Professor Plokhy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Taras, Professor Plokhy. At least the weather is clement and mild. How will our lives continue? For the speakers, we will have our speakers' dinner in the private dining room of the Morris Inn. So this is speakers and those who chaired panels. It's a bit awkward since this is the two-tier approach at this point in the conference. Thank you for your understanding. At 8 p.m. for all, we have a lovingly planned and prepared cultural evening, a night of Ukrainian poetry and music. It will take place at the Department Performing Arts Center at the south end of campus. You remember from yesterday? South is walking away from the Golden Dome, the Lodestar. Just follow the crowd. I have reasons to hope and believe that it will be a spectacular evening. The evening will be moderated by my wonderful colleague, Melanie Webb. Thank you, Mel. Where is she? Where is Mel? She's getting ready. Okay, that's good. So we are already thinking about the future. Tomorrow, we will have yet again Holy Mass at 8 o'clock in the Holy Cross Chapel in Stinson-Remick Hall, the building next door, south. At 9 a.m., we will gather for our fourth plenary session, chaired by the wonderful Dr. Svetlana Raymer. Thank you so much. Enjoy the evening, and I hope to see you all at 8 o'clock in Departolo. Maybe you could be there at 7:45, 7:50, because I think at 8 o'clock they really start. Thank you so much again.